Alan, since your book came out, it seems like it raised a lot of hackles, and you ended up getting a movie deal out of it. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience since we last talked 9 months ago?
Well, sure. I mean, it was certainly enjoyable to be able to talk about the book. I mean, you know, the intent that I wrote the book with, which was to just, you know, the Justice Brandeis quote of "Sunlight's the best disinfectant." So I think I accomplished that. I think you're seeing that manifest a bit right now in the reaction to the Acorn scandal, whatever you want to call it. Meaning that it's been more difficult, I think, for Republicans to define this as a voter registration fraud conspiracy. So if I had some contribution to not allowing that to sidetrack the debate off of what's important, then it's a huge success. So
now your movie, you expect it to be a full feature film next year?
It's a full feature film. It's a funny industry. I've seen the screenplay, so it's not it's not deadly accurate. So
now let me ask you this: do you have a name for the movie yet?
The working title is Some of the People All of the Time, and it's being it was written and will be directed by a very talented guy by the name of Billy Ray. He did Breach, Shattered Glass. He's a professional scriptwriter, obviously, but yeah, hugely talented guy, right guy for the project, and so I'm very happy with it.
Well, that's great news. Now tell me, it seems like a lot of the things that you predicted last January to us have come true, as far as the right wing kind of imploding on their own dirty tricks. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, well, a lot of that stuff's just not working right now, and I think it's mostly because there's such a the country's so polarized just on real issues, particularly economic issues, that there's just no room for the shenanigans. Whether it be the Bill Ayers attack, which I think has fallen flat on its face. I think it's found no responsive court. It's found no traction. So I think that. Yeah, so I think that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So I think that, yeah, faced with a dire situation a month out from Election Day, which is the economic meltdown, the Wall Street meltdown, I think that the country was not predisposed to listen to a bunch of nonsense, whether it be questions about Obama's religious faith, these questions about Bill Ayers, and also the issue about experience. I think it's experience in context of change wins, because even though McCain, if you're going to give him due credit, has been a reformer, has been a guy who's taken on his party. I'm not going to use the word maverick because Palin, I think, has oversold that word, but in his own right can carry those credentials. The problem is when you're 72, when you're a 26-year incumbent Republican, you cannot be the agent of change. And so I think it's an overwhelming force, and you saw it in '92, you saw it in '94, and I think you're seeing it in 2008.
Well, the Republicans have a history of attacking, whether it's candidates or people like you that write exposés. Can you tell us about any attacks that you experienced last?
Well, their tactic with me was to essentially dismiss me based on my felony conviction. So he's not a reliable guy. He's not someone whose words you can trust. He's just out to turn a profit. You know, all of these things, missing the larger point. Hey, you know, if I was them, if I was the spokesperson at the RNC, that's probably, you know, what I would have done as well. The problem is, you know, as you know, that saying facts are stubborn things, and recently in New Hampshire and Maine, the story in the New Hampshire phone jamming story has actually taken on a new chapter. So it truly is the never-ending story.
Can you tell us about the new chapter?
The new chapter is an indictment of Jim Tobin in Maine from a grand jury, impaneled, you know, a federal grand jury, on the issue of making false statements to the FBI.
Now, Jim Tobin was your quote, co-defendant, co-conspirator, the man that worked at the RNC, and can you tell us more about that?
Right. Well, he was co-conspirator. He was a co-defendant. He pled guilty. He pled not guilty. Was tried. Was convicted of the phone harassment charges that I pled guilty to. Was sentenced to 10 months. He did appeal, as was his right. The appellate court heard the appeal, remanded it back to the district court, saying essentially that the statute did not fit the crime. That clearly he had done something wrong, but it wasn't. It didn't correspond with the statute. The district court left really with no other option, acquitted. The Department of Justice then appealed and is going to hear their appeal on November 3rd. And I think it's an en banc appeal by the appellate court, meaning all the judges on the appellate court will listen to the appeal and make a decision. In the interim, the Department of Justice went forward with a charge of making these false statements. And so I figured it's, look, here's the thing, 95% of incumbents win. The Department of Justice wins 95% of its cases. They do not like to lose. And I think that, that
Can you
was...
tell us about the false statements?
Well, they speak for themselves, really. The false statements, as far as I know from having read the indictment, was that Mr. Tobin had told the FBI that he had not put Chuck McGee in touch with me. The three main players are myself, Chuck McGee, the executive director of the state party, who was my client, and then Jim Tobin, who was the catalyst, putting Chuck McGee in touch with me. So Tobin denied that he had put Chuck McGee in touch with me, and he also said that by the time he spoke to me, I had already spoken to Chuck McGee. So what he was doing was basically trying to establish that there was a pre-existing relationship between Chuck McGee and myself. He really wasn't needed to put the two of us together, and that therefore he wasn't part of a conspiracy. And based on my testimony, I guess, I mean, I'm not privy to this, but based on the court records from Mr. McGee's plea hearing, my plea hearing, our statements, and the investigation, and based on what I know for fact, he was lying to the FBI. So they decided to...
So there's 2 counts.
2 counts, that's right. So he's living the, honestly, I feel empathy for him and his family, what he's going through. I know what that's like. On the other hand, you come out of it as you go into it. So he needs to...
So he made the bed, and now the RNC spent, what, $6 million already defending this guy?
$3 million on the criminal case, $3 million on the civil case, which was then settled for, I think, $125,000.
So are they going to get stuck with the latest legal fees? Do you know?
Nobody knows. Nobody knows.
I mean, do you think that they're paying these fees in order to keep him quiet, or what's going on?
I don't know. I'd tell you 2 things. If the RNC was no longer or never had been concerned of things that Jim Tobin might say in the process of the investigation. So in other words, if there was not a component of covering up other deeds, if that did not exist, then this is a great outcome for the Republican National Committee. Because on the first hand, they can say, well, we defended our guy because he said he hadn't done anything. And then in the end, when it turns out that he did, it means that he didn't only lie to the government, but he lied to us. So they're off the hook as looking culpable.
But what if he starts to roll?
Well, and now the other scenario is assuming that there are deeds that they want him to remain silent upon or on. That's a whole other question, and I imagine there's some mechanism to continue to pay his legal fees. I did notice that he's still represented by the same attorneys that represented him throughout the process. So there's at least been that's an uninterrupted process. I can tell you those guys, Williams and Connolly, are very, very expensive, so they don't come cheap.
And how long do you expect that process for? Does he have a trial date?
No trial date yet. I mean, the indictment has come down, though, goes into next year. It goes on forever for this guy.
I assume you're the prime witness?
I may be. I haven't been contacted. I have no knowledge of that. They have my statements. It's all part of the court record.
So you didn't testify in the grand jury?
No, I don't think they needed me because they had, as I said, facts are stubborn things, and so they're hard to run from.